Hi, I'm Dr. Bertice Berry, and I want to tell you a story. I had gone on a day trip with my sister, Hermina Glass Hill. It was magical beyond, beyond, beyond. It was one of the best trips I've ever taken, and I didn't even leave the country. I didn't leave the state. Anyway, we were on our way home, and we were rather hungry. And we looked up, we were right before the highway. We'd been driving back roads, and so we didn't see a lot. And we see this restaurant that I hadn't been to in a long time, and I was like, let's go there. So we go in, and things are a little bit, confusing for folks. Service was a little bit behind, and so things were going on. The hostess went to seat us, and she took us to a table that had not been cleaned. And so we just kind of turned and sat at a different table. And she was like, "Oh, I was going to sit you here, but this hasn't been cleaned." And I was like, "It's okay." And we just sat at a completely different space. Anyway, turns out we were in the space of a server who was really had been maybe overworked, maybe there was a lot going on. And so then another server came out and loudly proclaimed that she was clocking out, probably in protest that we hadn't been seated in her section. Anyway, so our server was, everybody's kind of like complaining about him, and he forgot this, and oh, I need that, and he's got to go back and forth, and all of those things are going on. So when he comes over to us, we order and we say, well, we actually know our full order. If you don't mind, we can put in the full order. He was like, that would be great. So we do. And he comes back, and there's some stuff with the plates and things at the other table, and they're complaining, and somebody's called the manager over to complain about him. And then he brings us something that's not quite right, and we have to just ask for a change. And he was like, and I lightly put my hand on his arm and said, it wasn't your fault. It started in the kitchen. And he visibly relaxed and said, oof, thank you. Thank you for knowing that. And he was like, you are my favorite person over here. Completely favorite person. So Hermina and I kind of just went on. Now, earlier, leaving this place, we'd gone to the gift shop. It was a monastery. And we purchased some books and some spikenard and for anointing oil and, some honey. It's a monastery, and the monks are going to make things. And so Hermina gets in the car and goes, these books, I thought they were a collection of serenity prayers or service prayers. And they're serenity prayers for recovering from addiction. And she's like, what was I thinking? And I was like, well, I don't know, but your husband has a prison ministry, and maybe you were purchasing them for them. And she's like, probably. And so we're there having our lunch or dinner, and things continue to happen and continue to happen. And he keeps telling us how grateful he is for us. And so somehow we say we're going home to Savannah. And he says, that's where I'm from. And we're like, what? So we start exchanging things, and we know where he went to high school and all the other things. And we're having the conversation. And then he tells me some other things about himself. And we're just, it probably no more than a minute we've exchanged all these things. And so we told him where we had been. And he said, oh, I've heard of this place, and I know it's a place I need to go. And he said, in fact, I'm a Catholic. And he pulled out his Serenity Cross, and he said, and I have faith. And he said, but it's been a hard day. And Hermina says, I have something for you. And I look at her and I say, get one of those spikenards too. And she goes to the car, and she comes back, and she hands him the nard, and he begins to tear up. And then she hands him this book. That's the Serenity Prayer for Addiction, recovery from addiction. And then he really says, I can't hold it together, y'all. You're making me cry on my job. I'm not going to be able to hold it together. And he said, how could you know that I needed you? And we said, how did you know that we needed you? And we kind of looked at one another and he said, you have been a blessing to me. And we looked at each other and said, you have been a blessing to us. It was like a wonderful meal and a wonderful time of sisterhood. But then you add this frazzled, put out, overworked, complained about angel. And here we are with a prayer and spikenard. Sometimes you're put in the place that you need to be because you think you want to be there, because of a need that you have. And you find out sometimes it's a need someone else has. And sometimes when you allow those needs to come together, both can be healed. I love you.